All right, let's talk about a set of rules that, whether you realize it or not, has a huge impact on your life here in Ireland. I mean, it affects everything from the phone in your hand to the corner store down the street. We're diving into European Union law, and specifically that tricky balancing act between protecting all of us and powering Irish business. Okay, let's get right into it. I know it can sound a bit abstract, right? A law made in Brussels. What does that have to do with me? Well, what if I told you a decision made hundreds of miles away is the exact reason you can return that pair of runners you bought online from a shop in Cork, no questions asked? That's the kind of real-world connection we're going to unpack today. So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the two main flavors of EU law. Then, we'll see how they work in the real world with two big case studies, GDPR and consumer rights. After that, we'll zoom out to see who wins and who loses, and we'll wrap up with the big question. Is this whole thing just one giant balancing act? Right. First things first. Before we can get into the impacts, you've got to understand the tools the EU uses. See, it doesn't have just one way of making laws. It actually has two very different approaches, and they create totally different outcomes for businesses here in Ireland. Think of it like this. The first tool is a regulation. This is like a universal rule book. The second it's passed in Brussels, boom, it's the law, word for word everywhere from Dublin to Athens. The second tool is a directive. This is more like a set of goals. The EU says, here's the target we need you to hit, but it's up to each country, including Ireland, to pass its own national laws to actually achieve that goal. So one's a direct command, the other's a required results. Let's make this really practical. We'll kick off with a regulation I guarantee you've seen, probably just today. The one, the only, GDPR. So what's GDPR really trying to do? Well, it's got a two-part mission. On one side, it's all about giving you and me more control over our personal data. You know, who has it and what they're doing with it. But on the other side, it's also designed to make life simpler for businesses by creating just one set of data rules for the entire continent instead of 27 different ones. And because GDPR is a regulation, the process is incredibly direct. The EU passes it, and instantly, it's binding law in Ireland. There's no need for a debate in the Dáil or a new Irish Act. It's just the law. And every single business, big or small, has to get in line right away. And if you're wondering if businesses are actually taking this seriously, just look at that number. 1.2 billion euro. That was a single fine handed out to a tech company for breaking GDPR rules. This just goes to show you these EU regulations have some serious teeth. This isn't just a suggestion, it's the law. And it comes with massive consequences. So, what's the final verdict on GDPR? Well, it's a classic case of trade-offs. For us, as individuals, the good stuff is obvious. Stronger rights, more trust online. But for a small Irish business, it can mean huge costs for lawyers and new systems, not to mention the constant fear of those massive fines. Sure, it pushes for more ethical behavior, but you'll hear some argue that it can also pump the brakes on innovation because everyone's playing it safe. Okay, so we've seen a regulation in action. Now let's flip the coin and look at the other flavor of EU law, a directive. And for this one, we'll use an example that every single online shopper knows well, the Consumer Rights Directive. The main goal here is pretty simple. Make sure that whether you're buying something from a website based in Sligo or one in Stockholm, you have a solid, reliable set of rights. And the most famous of these is that 14-day cooling-off period, that right you have to return an online purchase, no questions asked. That's not originally an Irish idea. It's a standard that was set by this very EU directive. Now, look how different the process is here compared to GDPR. Instead of being an instant law, the EU sets the goal and gives Ireland a deadline. Then it's up to our own IRTUS to debate and pass Irish legislation, in this case, the Consumer Rights Act of 2022, to turn those goals into reality on the ground. This gives us a bit of national flexibility, but the final destination is not up for debate. And again, we see that balance, don't we? On one hand, consumers get much clearer, stronger rights. Irish businesses get to compete on a level playing field with companies all across Europe. But the trade-off for those businesses, they have to go through and update all their contracts, their websites' terms and conditions, and all their internal processes to follow the new Irish law. It just adds another layer of admin and can get a bit messy if different countries interpret the directive in slightly different ways. So, we've looked at a direct hit regulation and a goal-setting directive. Now, let's pull the camera back and put it all together. Who were the different players in this game, and what's the overall effect on them? When you lay it all out like this, you can see that nobody is a clear winner or a clear loser. For us as consumers, yeah, we get great protections, but we also get cookie banner fatigue, right? A small Irish business finds it easier to sell into Europe, but they get buried under compliance costs. And for the big tech giants, having one market to deal with is great, but it also paints a giant target on their back for those huge fines. It's a really complex web. And this all leads us to the final and probably most important point of this whole explainer. It's not really about whether these laws are good or bad. It's about something way more fundamental. Every single one of these laws is a balancing act. Imagine a giant scale. On one side, you're piling on protections for citizens, for consumers, for workers. On the other side, you've got the need to help businesses grow, to innovate and compete without drowning them in red tape. The whole challenge of EU law is just trying to keep that scale perfectly level. So to wrap this all up, here's a little toolkit you can use to analyze any EU law. Just ask these 4 questions. 1. What was it trying to achieve? What was its purpose? 2. How did it become law? Was it a direct regulation or a goal-setting directive? 3. Who was affected and how? And finally, 4. Did it encourage more ethical behavior or did it have a big impact on technology? Which leaves us with the big question to chew on. Are these EU rules basically a shield, there to protect us as consumers, or are they actually a barrier that gets in the way of innovation? As we've seen, the real answer is almost never that black and white. Thanks for tuning in.